Month. And we thought that there is no better way to celebrate APAHM than for APALA to uplift AAPI history. We are especially honored to be joined tonight by many APALA elders and emeritus leaders, and we will be acknowledging them more formally towards the end of our program.
Did we
As
tell her
the
to come
saying
over
goes,
to
we
Mama?
stand on the shoulders of giants, and they are APALA's giants who fought for and built APALA over 30 years ago. I'm excited to welcome you here tonight, and I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Casey Pereira, who is an AFT member and serves on APALA's National Executive Board, and she will lead us in a land acknowledgement.
So please don't do everything.
Oh, Ganesh Chief, President Domingo, Ganesh Chief APALA. I will be sharing in my family's ancestral language, which is Tlingit, and self-interpreting. Ganesh Chief Shayach Awudanehi, Ganesh Chief Lenape Hoking, Ganesh Chief Yake Yakhatusani, An Yaktusani, Kinshawat Yukhat Duasak. Casey Marita Pereira Yuchat Duasak Chak Nakhetsiti Hutsit Ayahana Kahidi Leka Yadechat Siti Chanwan Das Chan Ayachet Chanwan Ayat Dach Nachhunu Hutsnuwu Quan Dach Ayahat Ganesh Chish. Ganesh Chish is how we say thank you in the Tlingit language. I lift my hands to the first people of the lands that I'm joining from, which is the Lenape Hoking, also known as the Greater New Jersey, New York area over on the East Coast. I also wanted to thank the first peoples of that land as precious children of the land and water. I also shared my family's name that was given to me by my friend's father, David, after his grandmother with the same name passed, which is Hin Shawat, which means water woman. You can also call me Casey, as Lagaya shared. I am a member of AFT over at Rutgers University, Local 1766. I use she and they pronouns. Part of our introductions in Tlingit, and I see folks are using the chat, is that we share a bit about our lineage. So I'm so grateful, as I am considered a grandchild, a lost child of my tribe, that I'm a grandchild of China. I'm a grandchild of the Tlingit people, which are in Alaska. And so just wanted to lift up my grandparents, my Popo, Sue Law, and Edwin Law. They're heavy in my heart and on my mind as I join my Asian, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, and American family here with APALA. And just reflecting on that which connects us, both Indigenous, immigrant, and the waters and other water people that may be joining us today. So Ganesh Chish, I'll put some resources in the chat, and Ganesh Chish Lagaya.
Thank you so much, Casey. That was really beautiful. In that same sort of air, I'm going to share a little bit about my lineage as we are celebrating Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. So my parents, my aunt and uncle and my grandfather, as well as my father and mother, were all cannery workers in Alaska. And my grandmother was also a war bride from the Philippines. And their experiences and stories have shaped a lot of who I am today and why I am an organizer and joined APALA in the first year that I was an organizer. And we are all part of the history and fabric that make up Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. And we have a special part of the story to tell about our lives as workers and organizing for greater power and a voice. And our everyday stories of the impacts we make come together to form an amazing tapestry for all of us to behold. And tonight is going to be a great time to embrace and further understand our history and to make history ourselves. And so with that, I'd like to ask Stephen Moy to introduce our next piece.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Lagaya. My name is Stephen Moy, pronoun he, him, his. I'm APALA's first national vice president. I'm the New York chapter president of APALA. It's great to see everybody tonight. As a proud member of the IBEW of Local Unit Number 3 in New York City, I have the honor of introducing this brief video from the AFL-CIO President Schuler, who is also my sister of the IBEW. Although she cannot join us in person tonight, she wanted to be part of our celebration. President Schuler knows about breaking the mold and crashing the glass ceiling. She's a strong supporter of APALA and our mission. So please watch the video.
Hello, APALA. I'm so excited to have this chance to join you tonight and say a few words as part of this labor history celebration. And I want to thank APALA President Ligaya Domingo, who is a history maker herself, and to Sandra, the APALA team, all the organizers, leaders, and allies tuning in tonight. Thank you. Thank you for your hard work and your incredible activism. I'm also excited to recognize tonight's honorees, Katie Quan and May Chen, courageous organizers who have dedicated their lives to justice and were a part of that galvanizing garment worker strike in 1982 of Chinese and Hong Kong immigrant women who changed history. Their story is a perfect example of what we all know, that AAPI workers have always understood the importance of solidarity and the labor movement, even as their contributions haven't always been recognized. Go back to the very origins of our modern movement, and AAPI workers were the ones who figured out how to organize across races and nationalities. They overcame language and cultural barriers, and their stories are legendary. Hawaiian sugar workers who staged the first general strike by native laborers on the islands in 1841. Thousands of Chinese workers who staged a strike across 30 miles of rail in 1867. Japanese and Mexican agricultural workers who came together fighting for justice throughout the 20th century. These are our stories, our history, and we honor that work by moving the fight forward. We have an incredible opportunity in front of us. More than 2/3 of Americans support unions, and the numbers are even higher among young people under the age of 30. 9 in 10 young people under 30 support unions. Why? Because AAPI workers have helped lead the way. Nearly 1 million union members strong across this country, organizing across so many different sectors of our economy, from farm workers to domestic workers to teachers to the public sector, standing up to those who try to exploit us and our hard work, taking on the issues that will shape our work tomorrow, including automation and AI. APALA has been and continues to be that vital entry point, helping AAPI workers connect to their union activism, training the next generation of organizers, and providing all the resources our workers need. Showing every worker and every family you can have a voice. You can have a voice at your job, in our democracy, in your life. And right now, it's so important to use our collective voice. We are 6 months out from the most important election of our lifetime. In key states across the nation, we know that AAPI voters will play a crucial role in the fight to preserve our democracy. AAPI voters are the fastest growing group of eligible voters in the country. What we do is going to shape the next few decades and beyond. So let's protect our progress. Let's honor that history that we're celebrating tonight. Let's get the job done and keep moving forward. Have a great night, and I can't wait to see you soon.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sung Lee. I use he, him, his pronouns. I am National APALA's treasurer, the first vice president of APALA New York, the chair of the AFT Asian Caucus, and a member of the AFT AAPI task force. I appreciate President Schuler's words, and I appreciate the partnership between APALA National and the AFL-CIO, just as we work in APALA New York closely with the Central Labor Council of New York City. I'm a representative of the United Federation of Teachers Manhattan Borough Office and the chair of the United Federation of Teachers Asian American Heritage Committee, also a teacher, taught science, special education, and most importantly, I am proud to be a strong immigrant and an English language learner. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, a true founder of APALA, Chen. He served as the director of the UCLA Labor Center for 32 years and has recently transitioned to his new role as the director of labor and community partnerships in order to support the launch of 6 new labor centers throughout the University of California. He's also the founding president of APALA and the founding president of the United Association for Labor Education, representing university and college labor centers and union education departments and staff. There are many APALA members and leaders who have been fortunate enough to have him as a teacher and as a mentor. Kent Wong, please take it away.
Thanks so much, Song, for that very kind introduction. And it is so great to be celebrating API History Month with my sisters and brothers and family of APALA. It is hard to believe that it was 32 years ago that we launched the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance, the first national organization of Asian and Pacific Islander union members and workers throughout the country. And I'm also so pleased to be honoring the 2 extraordinary founding members of APALA, Mei Chen and Katie Quan, who have dedicated their lives for worker justice. I'm also so pleased to be joined with our first executive director, Matt Finucane, and many other founding members of APALA who are with us, including Tony Sarmiento, including Richard Gurtiza, Alex Hing. I'm going to forget somebody, so my apologies. Cindy Domingo, Terry Mast, Gloria Kawile, Richard Gurtiza, and although you heard from Stephen Moy, I also wanted to give a shout out to his dad, Lenny Moy, who was also a founder of APALA. So what is remarkable is the road that we have taken these last 32 years to build for the first time a national API labor organization that has done tremendous work to recruit and train a new generation of API union organizers. Everywhere you go in the country today, when you see API union organizers, they have either gone through an APALA Organizing Institute or they have been mentored and recruited by a graduate of an APALA Organizing Institute. And what we've seen is that through our work, we have forged labor and community partnerships. We have advanced issues that are directly impactful to the Asian and Pacific Islander community. We have helped to change the policy of the AFL-CIO with regard to immigration and immigrant rights, a fight that is still continuing to this day. We have mobilized more Asian American workers to join unions than at any other point in our history. And what we see today is that all across the country, there is a new energy, there is a new movement, there is a new struggle to grow and build unions to challenge corporate domination, to challenge white supremacy, and to challenge a US imperialist system that is spreading war and havoc around the world. So I think that as part of our global mission, we stand in solidarity with the people of Gaza. We stand in solidarity with those who are suffering the impact of US militarism and US imperialism internationally. So this is a critical time in the history of APALA. This is a critical time in the history of the US labor movement. There are more young workers who are working to organize and form unions than we've seen in decades. Many of these organizing efforts are being led by workers of color. We see a new generation of API union activists. They're rising to the forefront in higher education among our graduate students, in healthcare, in home care, in the public sector, in fast foods, in the gig economy. We see Asian American workers fighting for a better future. And so we are building on a rich legacy, not only of the 32 years of the building of APALA, but of those that have come before us. And I am so proud of our president, Ligaya Domingo, whose father, Silme Domingo and Jean Viernes, represented the best of the Asian American labor movement that fought to build the Longshore Workers Union in the Pacific Northwest, and also stood against the Marcos dictatorship when they were persecuting trade unionists and massacring people within the Philippines. So we celebrate the legacy of Domingo and Viernes. APALA will be organizing a delegation to go back to the Philippines in the coming year. and to build on that tradition of global solidarity. This is a critical year, as Liz Schuler said. 2024, the eyes of the world are looking at the United States, and we do not have an option in terms of what's the outcome of November. We need to take back the Senate. We need to take back the House. We need to elect Joe Biden as our president, and we need to get rid of Trump and the racist, white supremacist, misogynist legacy that Trump and his machine has done to poison the US people. So this is a critical time that we need each and every member of APALA to step up to the plate, to organize, to fight like hell, and let's prepare for our victory in November 2024. Thanks very much. I think we're transitioning. Does someone want to unmute and introduce the next segment?
Thank you, Kent. Thank you, Kent, for reminding us about the legacy of APALA and the importance of working together to ensure that we can continue to meet our mission. I'd now like to turn things over to our National Secretary, Michaela Vu.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Sung. My name is Michaela Vu, and I'm the APALA National Secretary from the APALA Massachusetts chapter. I got my start in the UAW and am currently working with AFT Massachusetts. I've had the lovely assignment of putting together tonight's presentation on AAPI labor history. And as a historian myself, this was really meaningful to read and now to share these stories of AAPI workers as we're fighting for justice and fairness throughout this very rich and diverse history. So I want to now start with kind of what does AAPI include? So this means Asian American Pacific Islander, and this is a vast area. There's over 100 different languages, dialects, multiple religions, and this is a group of us who are multi-generational, recent immigrants, adoptees, and those of us who are biracial. And according to the 2020 census, there's around 24 million Asian Americans, an additional 1.5 Pacific Islanders, and Native Hawaiians in the US. And a large percentage of these are immigrants, with a significant population of undocumented immigrants within our community. And we also know that we vote. There's about 64% of us are registered, with about 60% turnout, and these numbers are going up and need to continue to go up, as Kent just mentioned about the importance of this next election. And of this population of AAPI in the US, almost 800,000 of us are union members. We work in all sectors, though some of the biggest include healthcare, service, and education. And so while the scope of, AAPI is pretty broad, we have community together as union members within APALA, which is, as we all know, the AAPI constituency group of the labor movement. And so today, in this very brief history, I'm going to be sharing with you some stories about the important roles played by AAPI workers throughout the history of the labor movement. And there's much left out of this presentation due to time, and as this history covers, hundreds of years. But this is just a brief start to get into it. And so as we start, we want to just note that there's been documented immigration of Asians to the US reaching back to 1587. But the first major wave of Asian immigrants took place around 1830, when East Asian and Southeast Asian immigrants came to Hawaii to work on the plantations. By the 1850s, this next wave of immigrants to the continental US started with mostly low-skilled Chinese male workers coming to work in the gold mines and on the Transcontinental Railroad. Then the next major wave before kind of a more modern period of immigration occurred in the 20s, with large waves of Japanese and Filipino workers coming to the US and worked primarily in agricultural and light manufacturing. In these cases, these immigrants were seeking a better lives for themselves, often escaping war and famine in their home countries. But they quickly found that their welcome was conditional, their labor desired, but their presence in communities was not. They faced discrimination, racism, and violence. And before we dive a little deeper into this, I want to start with our first story tonight about Native Hawaiian sugar plantation workers in Hawaii in the 1840s. So in that year, Hawaii and the US established formal diplomatic relations and trade treaties. And at that time, Hawaii was still an independent nation. In 1840, industrial sugar production of sugar began on Kauai, and sugarcane had been a staple on the island, harvested and enjoyed by Native Hawaiians. But the switch to a plantation model required significant manpower to harvest sugarcane on this level, and there was a short supply of workers on the island. Due to mainly disease that came with the arrival of white men in Hawaii, the native population was down to about 75,000, which was a fourth of their population of 300,000 that existed prior. And prior to this plantation systems, Native Hawaiians had worked only for their chiefs and on a temporary basis in what was known as a labor tax. The Native Hawaiians struggled to adjust to the extremely laborious and intensive 10 to 12-hour days, clearing land, digging ditches, planting, fertilizing, weeding, and harvesting sugarcane. And they were paid in scrip, a form of credit instead of cash that could only be spent at the plantation store. In 1841, the Native Hawaiian workers had enough and walked off their jobs in the first recorded Hawaiian strike. While they were not organized as a union, they understood the power of standing together and stayed out on strike for 8 days to get a pay increase. These workers showed plantation owners that they would not endure such deplorable working conditions, and due to the fear of continued organizing among the Native Hawaiian workforce, sugar planters turned to recruit workers from across Asia, Mexico, and the Caribbean to work on these plantations. This strike was just the first of many really powerful and inspiring sugar strikes on the plantations in Hawaii fighting against exploitation. And so now as we move into coming back to Asian immigrants, continuing to face exploitation by their employers, as did many workers in this era of the 1800s, 1900s, they also suffered stings of racism from their own neighbors. Asian immigrants were stereotyped as degraded, exotic, dangerous, dirty, competitors for jobs and wages. And this cause would be taken by organized labor who helped push for the restriction of Chinese immigration in this period. The hostility would lead to the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, which remains the first and only major federal legislation to explicitly suspend immigration for a specific nationality. And the passage of the act presented the outcome of years of racial hostility and anti-immigrant agitation by white workers, and set the precedent for later restrictions against immigration of other nationalities, and really also started this era in which the US changed from a country that welcomed all immigrants to a gatekeeping one. And I just want to note here that it's important to recognize that the US labor movement was front and center in pushing this Chinese Exclusion Act. Union workers helped push the ugly narrative of the Yellow Peril to prevent Chinese immigrants from civic rights. And despite this hostility from organized labor, Asians organized themselves into independent labor organizations that often existed outside the mainstream labor movement. They followed the same principles of strength in numbers and strategized to gain and build their power against the bosses. And while they were isolated and facing racism and anti-union animus from employers, they nonetheless participated and led numerous strikes of the era, often being among the first workers to practice multiracial organizing. And this now leads me to my second story that I want to share about AAPI workers, which were the Chinese workers on the first transcontinental railroad. They faced dangerous conditions, impossible hours, and they were paid less than half the wages of white workers, and in addition had to cover the cost of their own food. And despite, hostility that they faced and no firm footing of any protected labor rights, they went on strike on June 24th, 1867. A few days earlier, there had been this massive tunnel explosion that killed one white worker and 5 Chinese workers. And they began organizing and organized 5,000 Chinese workers spanning over 30 miles of track into a strike. Their demands included better wages, shorter hours, and safer working conditions. The nonviolent strike posed such a threat to the completion of the railroad that the railroad company retaliated by cutting off all provisions to Chinese workers. After 8 days, the strike ended without any of their demands being met, but it was not a failure. The workers showed that they could not be taken for granted, and they challenged the prevailing stereotype of Chinese workers as passive, obedient, and without personhood. It was the largest labor strike of the era, and no doubt also reminded all workers of the power of standing together against oppression. And so now we're going to fast forward 36 years. 1903, Japanese and Mexican sugar beet workers in Oxnard, California, founded the Japanese Mexican Labor Association, also known as the JMLA. And at this time, the American Sugar Beet Company was trying to monopolize the market, driving down wages, and they had reduced wages from $5 an hour an acre to as low as $3.75 an acre for beet thinning. They stopped paying laborers in cash and paid them in store credit. And so 500 Japanese laborers and 200 Mexican laborers came together to form their union to combat the company's tactics. Their meetings were held in multiple languages, and they elected leaderships from both sides because they knew that their fate was tied together and that liberation and success could only happen through solidarity. In 1903, these workers went on strike, uniting 90% of sugar beet workers against the American Sugar Beet Company. Several weeks into the strike, a strikebreaker shot 5 strikers and killed 1, but the press ended up portraying the strikers as the violent ones, and public opinion was against them. Despite this, they held strong, and they had eventually won several of their demands, including returning to $5 an acre for beet thinning. But that's not the end of their story. Following the success of their strike, they became the Sugar Beet Farm Laborers Union and sought a charter from the AFL, which was granted on the condition that the union remove access to all Asian members. The union refused, writing to AFL President Samuel Gompers, quote, "We would be false to them and to ourselves and to the cause of unionism if we now accepted privileges for ourselves which are not accorded to them. We are going to stand by men who stood by us in the long, hard fight, which ended in a victory over the enemy." The charter was not granted, and the union would eventually disband. But as we saw with that example, AAPI union members know the power of multiracial solidarity. And one of the best examples of this moving forward almost 60 years is that of the Delano grape strike. The Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee, AWOC, which was chartered by the AFL-CIO in 1959, focused on organizing farm workers in California. There was challenges, though, as the companies often used Mexican workers, known as braceros, to be strike breakers illegally. Companies exploited and paid low wages to workers by pitting them against each other. The AWOC local in Delano was made up of mostly Filipino workers, and they eventually called for a strike against the grape growers on September 8th, 1965, demanding wages equivalent to that of federal minimum wage. More than 1,000 Filipino workers walked out of their grape farms to picket. However, the farmers soon replaced them with Mexican workers. At that point, there wasn't much unity between Mexican and Filipino workers, and the growers were using that to their advantage. But Larry Itliong, Philip Veracruz, and other leaders met with Cesar Chavez, and they came up with a plan to help all the workers. Less than after a week after the strike started, the National Farm Workers Association, led by Chavez, joined the strike. The two unions would later merge and create the United Farm Workers Organizing Committee, where they would elect Cesar Chavez as president and Larry Itliong as one of the vice presidents. This grape strike succeeded because the campaign used a lot of creative strategies, including a persistent boycott to elevate their issues. And the creation of the UFW also revolutionized farm workers organizing, which continues today. And so our next story is one that I think a few folks have spoken to already tonight, which is the assassination of Filipino labor leaders Jean Bernays and Silme Domingo, who are often forgotten in kind of the large history of violence and assassination within the labor movement. Domingo and Bernays first met in the 1970s, working in the fish canneries in Alaska, where workers were facing segregation and poor working conditions due to their race. The two fought against the discrimination in the canneries and eventually would lead a class action lawsuit against several Alaskan fish companies. And this would be one of the first times such a large seasonal migratory labor force would be represented, and over 700 plaintiffs in the case won a multi-million-dollar settlement. In addition to their labor activism, they're both fighting for democracy in the Philippines. They founded the Seattle chapter of the Union of Democratic Filipinos and organized protests in Seattle against the Ferdinand Marcos dictatorship. Bernays and Domingo won elections as officers of Seattle's ILWU Local 37 in 1980. They ran anti-corruption, pro-union democracy campaigns and promised to end bribery, vote buying, violence, and intimidation in the union. They were committed to fighting for democracy in their union and abroad. However, on June 1st, 1981, they were shot and killed inside their local union office in downtown Seattle. Their murderers were both members of their union and the Tulasang gang, and friends and family, mostly women, organized a committee for justice for Domingo and Bernays and discovered the connection between the murders to the Philippine president who ordered the killings in retaliation for their anti-Marcos organizing. Their legacy of fighting for democracy and workers' rights continues with the strong Filipino union members and community in Seattle and the Pacific Northwest, including many of the folks that are present on tonight's call. And so, for sake of time, I'm going to have to skip this story about the 1998 New York Taxi Workers Alliance strike. But if you'd like more information, happy to chat more about this. This was a really powerful story about South Asian cab drivers coming together to improve conditions despite not having rights to collective bargaining in New York City. And these are all just a small fraction of really powerful stories of API workers coming together against all odds to figure out how to organize, build multiracial coalitions, and fight. Their victories strengthened all workers and have inspired new generations of API workers to join the labor movement. And it's the legacy of these leaders that led to the formation of APALA in 1992. And at our founding convention, over 500 union members gathered in DC to celebrate our past and plan for our future. And this is something that we've continued to grow on today. Today we have 22 chapters. We could get it to 200 maybe one day. And throughout the US, and we're planning robust engagement in the 24 election to increase API voter turnout for union supporting candidates, strategizing with unions to create leaflets and videos in multiple languages to support organizing campaigns. And we host organizing institutes to help identify and strengthen the next generation of API union organizers who will help build the labor movement of tomorrow. And I apologize for the briefness, but we can definitely share more with folks as they would like. And I will now pass the mic over to Emily Reyes.
Thank you so much, Michaela, for sharing. My name is Emily Reyes. I am APALA's second vice president. It was such an inspiring presentation that showed us the extraordinary highlights of our labor history. I particularly think of my father when I think of like the 1920s, because my father came over as a contract laborer for the sugarcane plantations in Hawaii. Crazy guy, then left Hawaii in the middle of the Depression and came to California, where he faced more strife. But I digress. I can talk about that at another time. We are very fortunate today to learn more about a very special strike that involved mostly Asian immigrant women. We're going to watch a video.
The employees thought because we are Chinese and because we are women that we won't fight back. The employees thought we could be persuaded to take less and to give up some of our rights as workers. They attacked our union and said the workers had no voice in union policy and decision making. The employers even said that they could look out for the workers' interests better than the people we elected to lead our union.
But we really enjoyed those days, walking up and down with the organizers and sweating around.
The other thing we did in the shops, though, was to go around when we had a rally or a picket line or a demonstration and stop the shop and get everybody to come down to the rally. So that was fun too.
Tôi哋今日開會啦嘛，為咗工人嗰啲利益啦嘛。
利益？你工人想要乜嘢啊？
我咪而家咪要我哋嗰啲即係睇下我哋嘅工會啊，同我嗰啲廠商嗰啲對我哋啲工人嘅利益，我哋要咁做啦嘛。要睇下最樣樣嗰啲我哋都 benefit 得啦，樣樣嗰啲咯藍十字啊嗰啲啊，佢話即係啲價錢啊唔啱啊嗰啲咪要咩咯，係咁咯，講咁多。快啲入去！快啲入去！
阿嬸話：你今日出嚟做乜啊？嚟呢度做乜啊？
歡迎啊！嘅裝得嘅牛咪就係咁睇啊！嚟啦，工人福利咯。我咧就工廠嘅代表走咗。
Our workers think I'm concerned with shop conditions, so they elected me chair lady. I get the message from the union to my co-workers, like information about union benefits and activities.
對呢個新嘅合約嘅發生嘅時候
I tried to talk my boss into signing the contract, but he didn't want to give in. All the workers in the shop support the union. They even said they won't work anymore if he refused to sign the contract.
嗰輪布拍，佢哋寫得一沓嘢咁高，要我出去講，我話嘥氣，我講咩啊？我好簡單講幾句，我工人應該要團結。我哋啲工人係靠一個人嘅力量唔得，我哋要全體工人45000幾個工人出嚟。
We are very angry about the actions of a small handful of employers in the recent days. Enough is enough. They have faced their desire to negotiate, and in the end, they rejected the contract for the second time.
So the boss, after they sign the contract, so they means that they agree that they will giving out all the benefits.
It is my great honor to now introduce you to two amazing leaders who left their marks on our history, Katie Quan and May Chen. Katie is now a senior fellow at the UC Berkeley Center for Labor Research and Education. She was the former chair and associate chair of the Labor Center. Katie retired in 2016, but continues to work at the center on special projects involving research on global labor strategies and executive education for union leaders. But for tonight, Katie is here because she is part of our history. She was a seamstress, an organizer who was part of the Chinatown uprising in 1982, where she led her coworkers during the ILGWU garment worker strike. She also chaired the founding convention of the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance. In fact, I have a short clip I want to share with you that will tell you everything you need to know about her spirit and leadership.
It feels really, really good after over a century to finally be here within the House of Labor. Several hundred of us strong, meeting together to form an Asian labor organization.
Also joining us is May Chen, who worked on ILGWU's immigration project, which was the first union-initiated legal advocacy department for immigrant workers. As part of that work, she helped members with U.S. citizenship applications and sponsorship petitions on behalf of relatives. She is also a founding member and officer of APALA. Up until her retirement in 2009, she served as International Vice President of Unite Here and manager of Local 2325. We saw a clip of May in the ILGWU video. Welcome, Katie and May. We are so honored to have you here today. I have some questions ready for you too, but I also want to invite participants to leave their questions in the chat, which we will try to get to time permitting. So let's just start by going back to 1982. Can we go there, ladies?
Yeah.
Okay. May, tell us what was happening that summer in 1982 of New York City in the garment industry.
Well, in 1982, Chinatown had just a culture that all the women worked in garment factories and all the men worked in restaurants. And there were several hundred garment factories then. And it's something that built up over the decade before, because until 1965, the men really outnumbered the women in the community. But after immigration laws changed, and kind of with the pressure of civil rights and women's rights, the number of women and families immigrating became much larger. And the community in Chinatown became very active together with other ethnic groups on campaigns for housing, community services, and then jobs. And so the jobs in the garment factories were very critical to those women. And we were fortunate that these women workers joined the Ladies Garment Workers Union because the city garment industry needed these shops to produce the sportswear for the industry at that time.
Thank you. Katie, was there a history of militant action among the ILGWU members before the strike?
Well, amongst non-Chinese ILGWU members, there was a long history. So you had something in the history show about the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire that involved a strike that involved in 1911 a tragic situation that led to unionization. But before that, there were many strikes of workers. But the Chinese American workers mainly came after 1965, as May said. And so they came from impoverished regions of China for the most part. And for most of them, it was their first industrial experience. So there really was no experience of participating in unions or being militant about fighting for their rights.
So would you say, like, from that strike, what was surprising to you the most about what you and your coworkers were able to do then?
Well, so just for context, at the in 1982, I was working in a factory, the largest factory in Chinatown. But during the strike, I was brought onto the staff of the union temporarily to work in the strike office. And so, so my coworkers felt very, very strongly that they wanted to fight against the employers trying to basically gut the union. The employer said they wanted to cut back 3 holidays and they wanted to get rid of, you know, multiple benefits. And my coworkers, some of whom you saw in that video, said, you know, I'm in my 60s. I'm about to retire. You know, how can I let all these accumulated benefits go down the drain? And so almost all the workers who I talked to, whether it was in the streets, on the subway, or, you know, in the factories, everybody was willing to actually go out on strike. Now, the union officials, I have to say, at the time, were very hesitant. You know, they didn't really, you know what the Chinese workers were feeling and what they were saying. And they didn't know if the Chinese workers, who comprised about maybe 90% of the local at that time, they didn't really know what the Chinese workers would do. And so that was the big quandary. And so the union kind of hesitated in the beginning about calling for a strike. But when they finally did, they were surprised to find what your video showed is that, you know, thousands, tens of thousands of people came out to join the rallies and really wanted to fight for their rights.
Yes, thank you. I mean, it's just a huge show of worker power, but not just worker power, women power. Thank you. May, what was your favorite memory from that strike?
Yeah, it goes to what you just said. The rallies were amazing and unbelievable, but I think my most lasting memory, and has continued to today, is the sense of sisterhood and solidarity among the workers. You know, we met amazing worker leaders in that strike who have remained good friends even down to today. And we keep waiting for Katie to come back to New York so we can all go out to dim sum together. But the solidarity and the sisterhood of these workers was just amazing. And you can see it in the video. As Katie said, the women, once they got mobilized, they were going to stick together until they won.
Katie, what do you want people to remember the most about the 1982 strike? I mean, we see footage, but what would you like everyone here to remember the most?
Well, I'll say 2 things. The first is that we should never underestimate the power of Asian immigrant women getting together and fighting. These were women who a lot of people sort of wrote off as uneducated, as, you know, women who are taught to not fight and not, you know, buck authority. And these were people who even their own union didn't know whether they would fight or not. But we saw from the video and, you know, from history that that's not the case. And so we should never underestimate the power of women workers when they band together. The second point that I think we should take away from this strike is that the women had to fight against Chinese bosses. And so there was a question as to whether they would put race first or class first. And I think they showed quite clearly that when their own benefits and interests are on the line, they will fight the boss, whoever they are, no matter whether they're Chinese, Asian, or what. And so I think that that's an important lesson, because a lot of people wanted to paint this as like a, situation where it was Chinese bosses and Chinese workers together and it was impenetrable. No, that was not the case. And so I think that's an important lesson for labor activists to take away.
Great, thank you so much, Katie. And this question's for both of you. What forms of intimidation did you face from the employers? Can you talk about that?
Well, I think generally especially in that period of time, there were a lot of very, very old-fashioned beliefs in the community that, women had to be obedient, they had to listen to the men, they couldn't talk back, and, they couldn't contradict the authorities that they were expected to listen to. So as women began to get more vocal, initially they were kind of scared, but I think they found power in numbers. And so when they started to really speak up, then they realized that they were able to successfully push back. So some of the fear is more cultural and sort of imagined, but there were real intimidations of, bosses who were threatening the workers to, fire them from their jobs and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I want to build on that because, I've been involved with a rank and file group who pushed for childcare, pushed the union to provide childcare. And so, there were real instances of bosses posting in the Chinese newspapers, about activists who, they said we should hire this activist because, she's a great worker, but actually what they were doing was blacklisting her. And to a person who doesn't speak English and who doesn't have any other job opportunities, that kind of blacklisting is very, very severe. And so there was a potential for some of the leaders of this strike to become blacklisted. But I think that May's right when it became, when the workers became dominant and, the strike became successful, then actually the workers who participated in this strike were not only protected, but also respected.
I see a few more questions coming in the chat, but we have to continue moving on. I'm gonna wrap this Q&A up. 10 years later, you were both front and center in another important event, and that is the founding of APALA. Why were you so passionate about the creation of APALA? May, can you talk about that?
Well, first of all, I want to say I love the video clip of Katie. It brings back such memories. But really, it's kind of what we said before, that these immigrant workers were often so invisible. And so finally, there is going to be an organized place where we could call home. And I remember in the founding convention, our union brought a couple hundred people to that founding convention. We took buses we often took buses to Washington for rallies and demonstrations, but this was very special because we were taking busloads of garment workers to form APALA, and that was very exciting.
Katie?
Well, at the time, there was a certain time in history when there were a group of Asian activists in New York. There was a group in Los Angeles, and there was a small group. I moved from New York to San Francisco, and at the time, we in San Francisco had a small group, and then of course there was a large group in Hawaii. And these 4 centers formed the basis for the formation of a national union. And so the time was right because we had the sort of the constituent base. I should also say that there were people also from Seattle and other places in the United States, but those 4 places were the main places. And I think what was also important was that Asians were now in leadership of their unions. And so, you know, people, you know, I was head of the San Francisco local of the union, and there were people who were head of the janitors union and head of even the union in LA that represents the Disneyland workers and so on. And so there was like a leadership base as well that, you know, was recognized by the AFL-CIO. And I do want to say that a number of union presidents went to bat for us at the AFL-CIO. And of course, you know, May and my union president, Jay Mazer, was one of those people, but he wasn't the only one. There were presidents from AFSCME, from many other unions who really supported this effort. And so the timing was right at the time.
Thank you so much, Ashley, for shouting out my Los Angeles chapter of APALA. I see some of our members out there. May, Katie, thank you so much for your time today and sharing with us. There were more questions that were coming up. We're like towards the end here, and so we couldn't get to all of them, but we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for sharing with us. And I'd like to pass this over to our president, Ligaya Domingo.
Wow, that was amazing. Thank you so much, Katie and May. We are so indebted to your leadership forever, to learn from you. You can see that people really wanted you to stay and talk all night. And Emily, thank you so much for the wonderful Q&A. We are nearing the end of our time, and as I mentioned earlier, we have many elders and emeritus leaders that are joining us today, and I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge them. So if someone could please put up the slide. Thank you. So we have here tonight Alex Hing, Cindy Domingo, Rich Gertiza, May Chen, Tony Sarmiento, Matt Finucane, Gloria Kawili, Kent Wong, and Katie Quan. Thank you all for all of your leadership over the years and for being with us here tonight. We couldn't have done this without you. I can't say enough how much their leadership also has meant to me personally as a young APALA member, and how I've looked to many of them for counsel in my new role. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We've talked a lot about our past tonight, but I'd like to end by talking about our future. APALA, like much of labor, sits at the crossroads right now. There is a new energy in unions and organizing unions, and we have a duty to be a part of helping workers from unions strengthens the unions we have. We have a duty to identify the next generation of AAPI union leaders and instill in them the values that are at the core of APALA. We are planning a robust program around the 2024 election, and like any good organizer, we are thinking about ways we can build our muscle, strengthen our membership, and elect pro-union and pro-AAPI candidates. We're continuing to help to transform the labor movement, and we will continue to grow as APALA. I also know that there are a lot of allies and friends of APALA with us here tonight, and I ask you to please continue to help our organization grow stronger by joining APALA if you're not already a member, or if there's someone that you can ask in honor of API Heritage Month to join APALA, please pass it along. It's really important that folks renew their membership every year. It's an important part of sustaining our organization. So thank you again so much for being here tonight, and we look forward to seeing all of you again soon. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good night.
Hi, Alex.